We're right in the middle of pumpkin harvest here in the mountains, and if you're anything like me, you think there's nothing better than homemade pumpkin pie. And one of the things that I always look forward to every year is making some fresh pies out of some pumpkins that I've grown myself. And I'm going to use a couple of different pumpkins today to illustrate some of the different techniques that I'm discussing in our program today. And I'm going to show you today how we process these pumpkins. It is a little time consuming, but it's very rewarding and fairly easy once you get used to it. I've chosen a pumpkin today that's kind of small for demonstration purposes. It's not hardly as lobed as you can see here, and there's a reason for that. The pumpkins that are more deeply lobed or deeply ridged can be a little bit harder to peel and trim, and so I've got one that's a little bit easier today. Again, this is a variety called Porcelain Princess. It's a variety that's supposed to be a real good eating pumpkin, and so we're excited about that. So our first step today is I want to remove the stem and the top out of this pumpkin. And so how do I do that? I've got a series of 3 knives here. I'm going to take my long slender knife, again with the stiff blade, and I'm going to start cutting around from the very top of the stem here and just make an even cut all the way around until I can just easily remove the stem on its own. It does take a little bit of pressure, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my pumpkin on the cutting board and where I can apply pressure down and remove my stem that way. After that, we'll be ready to remove the seeds. So now we've got the stem and the top removed from our pumpkin, and we're ready to remove the seeds. As you can see here, I've got the pumpkin cut in half, and now I can take a spoon or some type of a scraper or even my hands and remove the seeds fairly easily and discard those. If this were a bigger pumpkin, what we could do is simply just leave the hole in the top and put our hand down inside the pumpkin and scoop it out that way. If I was going to use it for ornamental purposes or maybe even carve this pumpkin, as some people like to do, I would definitely want to leave it intact. So now we've got our seeds removed, and we want to move on and think about how we're going to cut this pumpkin up and further process it. With my pumpkin on my cutting board, and at this point, it's very important to have the pumpkin on the cutting board. It's a surface that we can cut into. It's not going to damage anything. We can put pressure on it. And there's one of 2 ways you can go here. You can either leave the pumpkin cut in half, which a lot of people choose to do. This is probably the simpler way and the easier way of doing it. And with that pumpkin cut in half, you can just place the pumpkin cut side down on a baking sheet that's big enough to hold it. Make sure you grease the baking sheet a little bit. You can simply slide your pumpkin in the oven on about 400 degrees. Leave it for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Check it, and once the flesh is soft, you can take a spoon or something and remove that very easily and simply from the skin of the pumpkin, and you're ready to continue your processing there. The other thing we can do is what I like to do. It's a lot of people consider it the hard way. To me, it's kind of enjoyable. It takes a little extra time. It's a little extra hardship, but I like to do it this way simply because that's the way I've always done it. But I like to take the pumpkin and I like to peel it. And so I want to talk to you just a little bit about how to safely and properly peel the pumpkin. You want to be really careful because you can cut yourself. As you can see, I've got the pumpkin cut into strips or cut into small slabs. And I'm going to take my paring knife that I showed you earlier, and I want to sit down again with my cutting board, and I want to take the skin off the pumpkin before I get ready to chunk it up and put it into a pot and boil it down. Now, it's real important. Human nature really wants to cut toward itself. And the skin of these pumpkins are very thick. They're waxy. They can be hard. It depends on the variety that you're dealing with. This one's not hardly as bad as others that I've raised in the past, but it still poses a threat. And so you can't peel the pumpkin cutting away from yourself. It's just too hard to do. So one little nifty trick I've learned is I'll just lay the pumpkin pieces down on the cutting board, and I'll simply remove the skin as shown. Now I'm ready to simply cut up or chunk up my pumpkin and get it ready to put in our cooking pot. As you can see here, I'll just take my cutting knife and cut it up into small chunks. You will find the smaller you cut these chunks, the quicker it cooks up and makes it a little easier on you. I'll simply, once I get these chunks finished, I'll take them and transfer them over to my pot, and we'll begin the cooking process. Now that I've got my pumpkin cut and chunked up, I've got it transferred over into my pot for cooking. This is probably the simplest part of the whole process. I just want to add about a half a cup of water, and this is really important. I don't want to make my pumpkin puree too soupy. Pumpkin is about 90% water for the most part, and so it doesn't take a whole lot to cook it down. I do want to put, like I said, about a half a cup in, and that's to keep the bottom of the pumpkin from scorching as it's getting hot to start with. I've got a old-fashioned mashed potato masher, and as the pumpkin starts to soften, I'll just simply mash it up, and when it's in puree form, then I'm done. I'm ready to set it aside, let it cool, transfer it into freezer bags, or if you so desired, you could put it in canning jars and can it. Another thing you can do, if you don't have an old-fashioned mashed potato masher, if you want to go the quick route, the easier route, have a little bit thinner puree, you can always take an electric hand mixer and achieve the same purpose very easily. And that's about it. I hope you've enjoyed the program today. I hope you've seen that it's not as hard as most people think that it is to process pumpkins. And if you would like more information about growing pumpkins, processing pumpkins, if you would like more information about canning pumpkins, I mentioned that you could do that if you so chose. We'd encourage you to call or stop by your local extension office and pay us a visit. We'd love to see you. Cooperative Extension has offices in every county in North Carolina, including the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And so stop by and check us out.